And if you could list our guests verbally.
Okay, I have myself, CAO Teresa Fuller. I have recording secretary Loretta Paget. I have Councillor Jackie Northey. I have Mayor Rob McDonald. I have Councillor Brian Guest. I have Councillor Cindy Oram and Councillor Kyle McIntosh, Foreman Patrick Taylor, and also I have Chris from Fortis. And I'm sorry, Chris, I forgot what your last name is.
Bert.
Chris Burt. Online, I have Stu Sackelt with the East Central Review and what appears to be Harvey Turcott as well.
Excellent. We have no public hearing. Are there any agenda additions or amendments to the agenda?
If I may, Mr. Chair, I would like to add in a closed session item just before the new, like at the beginning of the new and unfinished business. And it would be under as personnel, FOIP section 17.
So that'll be item 7.05.
Sure, or 7.05. Yeah, that works. Hello, how's it going? Good.
Any other amendments or additions to the agenda? Any chance of a motion on this?
I'll do that.
Thank you, Jackie. Moving the agenda as amended, all in favor? Carried. Minutes of minutes.
Lots and lots of minutes.
We'll move the minutes of the May 2nd, 2022 regular meeting of council be approved as presented.
Thank you, Jackie. All in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to minutes of May 16th.
I will make the drop motion.
Thank you, Kyle. All in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to minutes of May 19th.
I can make that motion.
Thank you, Cindy. All in favor? Carried, yeah. Item 5, delegations. Mr. Burke.
Thank you. It looked like everyone had in their package my slides. So let me just start off. Thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. As you know, I'm with Fortis Alberta, and who is Fortis Alberta? So we are a distribution provider. What that means is we're the company that delivers power to homes and businesses in your community. And we serve more than 500,000 residential customers in the province of Alberta. We have 128,000 kilometers of power lines. We're in 240 communities. We employ more than 1,000 Albertans in delivering power to your homes. You can see by the little graphic where we fit into the picture. So power is generated at generation facilities across Alberta, then it's transported by transmission lines to substations, and then from those substations we take the power and we deliver that. We are regulated by the Alberta Utilities Commission. So both our rates and our terms and conditions of service are approved by the AUC. So tonight, we want to talk a little bit about franchise agreements, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions. So currently, the franchise agreement between Fortis, Alberta and the town of Bashaw, that was approved in the AUC's decision 2013-99. And it's based on a standard template that was negotiated between what was then the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association and ACTWA Electric and Fortis Alberta. We came up with a standard template, and that's what the franchise agreement is based on. And through the franchise agreement, Fortis Alberta provides essential services to your town and residents in your town. We operate and maintain the distribution lines. And to do that, we use municipal right of ways. The franchise agreement is under Section 45 of the Municipal Government Act. That's where the franchise agreement comes into play. Under that agreement. And if you take a look at Section 45, that's where
Grab
Yeah,
it for
yeah.
me if you want.
I've got it here. So
Okay.
it's Section 45, it's titled Granting Rights to Provide Utility Service. A council may, by agreement, grant a right, exclusive or otherwise, to a person to provide a utility service in all or part of the municipality for not more than 20 years. So it stipulates that it can be no more than 20 years. I'll jump to number 2. Before the agreement is made, amended, or renewed, the agreement must be advertised and it must be approved by the Alberta Utilities Commission. And so that's what happened back in 2013. The agreement was made and approved by the Alberta Utilities Commission. And it had a total term of 20 years. On the next slide, you can see that that 20-year term, it was broken up into essentially four chunks. One 10-year term, and then 2 subsequent 5-year terms. And that first 10-year term comes to an end June 30th, 2023. And the town passed bylaw 747-2013, authorizing the franchise agreement. And so what we're looking for is council approval to enter into the first 5-year extension of the franchise agreement.
Have we not done that already?
You guys passed a motion to have Chris present and tell you about that.
Okay, I thought we
But
already,
then
I thought we did actually approve the next 5 years.
I
I don't
even
think the motion was
better.
worded that way.
Carry on.
okay. There's benefits to a franchise agreement. It cements our long-term relationship. And not only that, but through the franchise agreement, that's where franchise fees come into play, and it offers the town an additional source of revenue. There may be entities within the town that don't pay taxes. So that's one way of receiving some revenue from those sources. The other thing with the franchise fee is that the town has joint use of our facilities. So if you want to hang banners on, street posts, things like that. Also, within the franchise agreement, there's something called a Schedule B. It's for additional services. We've had we've had one town use it. I believe it was the town of Milk River, and this was fairly recently. They use Schedule B to assist their internet association to receive funding for to increase their Wi-Fi within the town. And through the agreement, they received additional funding to make that happen through Schedule B. So that's kind of what Schedule B could be used for. So on the franchise fees, those are determined by council. The Alberta Utilities Commission, when they approved the standard agreement, they set a cap on franchise fees of a maximum of 20%. Those franchise fees are calculated on the transmission and distribution charges only that appear on people's bills. Fortis also pays linear taxes for our property or our facilities that are within your town. You can see the amount of franchise fees and linear taxes that have been paid over the last 3 years. In 2021, the franchise fee of 2% resulted in franchise fees being paid to the town of $17,867. Linear taxes brought in another $7,000 for a total of $25,000. Franchise fees vary across communities throughout the province. You can see on the franchise fee and linear tax comparison slide, Acme, a little bit smaller, they also have a franchise fee of 3%. Manville, they're in ATCO service territory, they're at 9%. Boyle, they're at the maximum. So there's a huge range, and that's determined by council based on the needs of your community and just the direction that you want to go with those franchise fees. Yeah, so maybe I should ask, is there any questions about the franchise agreement?
I just want to be clear.
Yeah.
You noted that this was based solely on transmission and distribution costs. This isn't capturing other costs like GST, carbon tax, etc.
That's correct. The franchise fee is only on transmission and distribution amounts that are on bills.
Does a GST apply on top of the distribution fee? So if I'm a resident, I'm adding up my bill, right? And so I get all of these different charges. Is the GST applying on top of that franchise fee or the carbon tax?
So the carbon tax, I believe that's only on the gas side that you see a line carbon tax.
Okay.
On the electric side, certainly the franchise fee would be calculated based on the, it would be the 2% or 3% of the transmission and distribution amounts on a bill. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head if that total, when you add everything up, which includes the franchise fee, if that gets the GST.
I just want to make sure there's no tax on tax, in essence, is what I'm.
Yeah. I need to look at a bill to confirm that. but yeah, let me confirm that.
Anybody else have questions?
I don't have a question about franchise fees, but since you're Fortis,
Yeah.
and I realize that this probably isn't fair, but you are Fortis.
Yeah.
So every couple, 3 years, they come through town and they do tree trimming.
Yes.
underneath their power lines. And they do a utility cut, which leaves our trees very lopsided and very
Vulnerable.
right. And so then what happens is, number one, our trees are prone to disease and branches or limbs breaking off. And so then what we do with the beautification committee is we're spending a bunch of our money with a private contractor to do a proper pruning. And so it's kind of an ongoing, never-ending,
It's a catch-22.
yeah. And is there some way that Fortis would see it in their budget or heart to do a little different pruning process, that they would spend a little more time and effort in doing a
A cleaner print.
Well, it's a proper one so that we don't leave them vulnerable, leave the trees vulnerable. There's ways to do that. And they just cut it,
because if
right?
you drive down 54
Yep,
and look at your power line,
yep,
those trees, I mean, they're massively huge to the roadside and they are cut right off on the utility side and it leaves for a, number one, it's unsightly, the trees don't look good. Number two, they're prone to disease. And number three, it's costing us as a town a lot of money to fix.
because the town goes in after the fact
Mhm.
That's great.
and
Hires.
That's great. We're hiring a private contractor to.
Because otherwise we'll lose the trees
We'll
entirely
lose
one
the
day.
trees.
And they're, well, in their age, they'd be
Established.
older, yeah, they're very well established trees that they're actually becoming very vulnerable to the cuts that are consistently happening.
And again, I hate to pose that to you because that may not have any, any overlap in your jurisdiction, but you are Florida.
yeah, certainly we have a brushing department and that's what they're assigned to do. They keep the trees
Right,
pruned so far from the lines.
I understand that.
Except
But-
that I
but-
think you
but
can do it so that
We
it
could
doesn't
do a little
hurt the
better
tree.
job is what I'm hearing.
Right,
Well, even if they speak to an arborist about how to properly prune them instead of just, right,
Yeah. I think that's called polarding a tree when you just slice it like that and it,
yeah.
yeah. Well, the fellow I talked to, he calls it a utility cut
okay,
versus an ornamental cut.
right.
And I don't know if that's the correct terminology, but the herbalist that I talked to, that's what he was describing it as. And it really leaves our trees in a, not a very
Good way.
good way.
Let me see what can be done there.
Because, I realize that it's not your job to make the tree necessarily, to a ornamental type. But to leave it in the condition that they leave them in is really difficult to.
Okay.
to
No,
see.
that's helpful to hear that feedback where we can do better.
And honest, if you drive down 54,
That's where you see it the worst.
It's the
you're
worst,
okay.
right?
54th Street, I guess. No, Avenue, sorry.
And we're on 52nd now.
Yeah, so if
So go
you,
two
Yeah.
blocks that way
yeah,
and
Drive
Okay.
down that avenue and you will see exactly what I'm referring to. It's so obvious.
Okay.
And anything you could do to alleviate that problem would be appreciated because it's a concern.
Okay.
We're actually considering, some of the trees should actually be removed. They're in such bad condition and we're gonna try and save them, but it's costly. It's costly.
Anything else?
yeah, so what we're hoping for is to get your signed approval to move into the the first 5-year extension and go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I suspect you might want a motion to accept that as information.
It's like you're reading my mind.
Right there.
All in favor? Carried. Delegation 5.2. Ty.
That me?
That's you.
Hey guys, my name is Todd Wilson. My name is Matt.
What's it like?
I'm here today on behalf of the Bashaw Chamber of Commerce. After some discussion, we feel that we are in a good position to go after some potential grant money to revitalize the entrances and main streets in our town. We think there's a little bit, well, we think there's a major economic benefit, and we think that as it stands right now, we're probably suffering few unseen losses, because when you drive into a place and it's not attractive, it doesn't make somebody want to pull in and spend money on, when you're a commercial. So, yeah, we had formed a little subcommittee, and we got kind of a vision. There's nothing concrete or set in stone yet, because we knew we need to come and talk to council. Obviously, we understand that anything that's going to change as far as infrastructure or otherwise, gonna have to get approved by you guys. So yeah, we want to come and share some of the vision and ask for some input, and ultimately approval to carry on and write some of these grants and spruce up Maine.
Perfect. What's the vision?
Well, we're not completely attached to any one thing or another. The way we're trying to situate it is so that instead of having one giant capital project with one particular number in mind, the way inflation is moving, that's a bit of a dangerous game to play. If anyone's familiar with the Willie Bronze at Denalda, they've been fundraising for that poor guy for like 30 years. Well, not 30, but you know what I mean? And it was gonna cost them 10,000, whenever it was 10, 15 years ago. Well, now, so what we're aiming to do is itemize the improvements we think we can make and attach a number to them. And then as grant money comes in or doesn't come in, we can start checking things off the list. And then we understand also that there's some infrastructure there that's aging and eventually is going to need to be replaced. So we're not looking to do anything that's not going to be reusable when that day comes. So off the top of our heads, we've come up with ornamental streetlights, which is sort of like the Channel Portis about, because we know there's going to be some approvals there. That's a pretty large ticket item. That's going to be expensive. You can go smaller scale with ornamental stop sign poles, or help me out, Teresa, what bowlers, what are they called?
Bollards,
Bollards. Yeah,
where they're little short poles that can kind of delineate the edge of
Yeah,
the street or
exactly.
sidewalks or bowboats or.
there are some things you can do to gain space on your boulevard or not, like, and when you look at our neighboring towns, they've implemented a lot of them. What we don't want to do, because we're a rural town, is we don't want to give up our functionality. I think Brian had mentioned in passing one day that we need to be able to get trucks and trailers up and down our main street. Whereas somebody like our neighbors at Alex, they've done a beautiful job aesthetically, but it's not very functional. And it's not great for public works because they can clear snow and, so many other things. So we realize there are a lot of interest to serve here, beyond just, beautifying it. And so that's why I want to come and have some correspondence with specifically Public Works. And then if there was something in particular that council wanted to see versus didn't want to see implemented, something that fit into your guys' schedule with infrastructure replacement better than other things, then we would be very keen to hear about them. If not, we're probably going to go after lighting first, and more steel work past that. We love greenery, but if you're going to put things in, just have to rip them out in 10 years when the sewer lines and things need to be redone. That's pointless, we think. So yeah, ultimately we're just looking for the go ahead to start writing some of these things up.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good to me too.
Excellent. Okay.
Out of curiosity,
Yeah.
one of the grants you guys are looking for, are any of them to change the faces of the stores themselves?
Well, that's a little bit trickier because it's
It's private.
private
yeah,
property.
Yeah,
So if it would fit and there were interested parties, then we're not going to close ourselves off to anything, but we just think it's probably easier, to do things that are public property. And then you can do them all and it's uniform and versus,
yeah.
there are some great historic buildings on Main. I would love to see some of them brought back to their former glory, but it's asking a lot of people and they're already
For sure.
some of them tight, so.
I think lighting would make a huge difference.
Once you start a project like that, it tends to kick off other people getting involved.
Especially if there's
Right.
grants, because there are grants for
Yeah.
that too, for faces.
Yeah,
Let me know if
So-
there's anything I can do to help.
okay. Well, just specifically, we just want to talk about, making sure that it's functional, you know, so anything you guys really don't want, I guess that's the biggest thing. What do you absolutely not want to see? So that we can know to stay away from that. Is there anything that off the top of your guys' heads, you don't know, we don't like that idea?
I agree with you about functionality because I've driven into Alex quite a bit and it's crazy. I don't even know how people get down that street, that main street. It's like, if the car's parked, if it's a long truck,
It's nice.
yeah. So yeah, that would be the only thing. I agree with that. I don't think we should have something down the middle of Main Street where we can't get trucks and trailers. down.
Mhm.
I think for myself, I would like us to tackle our strategic plan where we see what our priorities are. We haven't done that yet as a council. And one of the things that I know I pushed for last summer is that I really do want community input. And so, from my standpoint, this would be the type of thing that could perhaps be tacked on as part of a public consultation on strategic planning or some of those other documents where, you know, a section under beautification or business development or business or economic development, I think could segue in. So, knowing that our strategic plan should be on the horizon, I think this could be something that dovetails.
Mr. Chair, I guess my question from an administrative standpoint and communication standpoint, I guess, is that it may be helpful to have things in writing as to what their commitment is, so that council can review it prior versus just like a generic or a general approval, just because there's quite a few aspects about it that it's sort of like knocking one domino over. You knock one domino over and a blackmore fall that you hadn't intended. So I guess a good example might be like Ty and I were initially talking about, you're speculating about underground power throughout Main Street. And so there's not like many of the businesses right on Main Street, the front of their building is their property line. And so then the only places that really, or locations potentially for, the underground power is under the sidewalk. So that's just a very basic example of how, the intent of replacing lights and doing underground power also dovetails into another substantially expensive project, whether we go to sidewalks and things. And then from there, it's a multifaceted puzzle because you're crossing water, sewer lines and, gas lines and all of the infrastructure that goes below in the various areas. And I don't have a great functional understanding of what that 3D dimensional level puzzle looks like. But I know Main Street is on our infrastructure plan, but like to do full on infrastructure, like underground infrastructure on the Main Street is going to be very, very substantial. Like low ballpark would be 2 to 3 million, but realistic ballpark could be closer to 5. If you're looking at full paved infrastructure, and I understand the project, they're looking at a more beautification things. So replacing streetlights and with existing above ground power, sure, it's not quite as aesthetically
Well, we actually
pleasing,
had a
but
little discussion about this because in theory, your septic and your water should be 6 to 8 feet deep. So because we've got pavers out there and it's not concrete, we actually thought it might be really conducive to that particular project because, you can pick up whichever pavers you need. So we're thinking if you can tee off of a power line and come underground from there to a main bell hole, and then from there bore all the way down the sidewalk to the next bell hole, then you're not disturbing up anything other than that localized spot where the pole's gonna sit. Still gonna be expensive. But at least you're not-
It's not cheap.
No, it's not, but versus ripping up everything and then replacing it all. Probably a little bit better.
So as a person who writes lots of grants, I'm wondering how much Kai, you looked at the grants that they might apply for?
Yeah, so the reason it kind of spurred this is because I sit on the Stetler Ag Society.
Yeah.
And the best money we ever spent over there was hiring a front office person who was very talented at grant writing.
Yeah.
And so the projects we've been able to put together over the course of the last 3 years in COVID times at that have been tremendous. And just because we've got somebody dedicated to going after these things.
Right.
So that's what got me thinking, like, this money's out there. A lot of the ones we've won over there, we would actually qualify for here, and maybe even more so.
Yeah.
So I just thought, and we've had some correspondence with that particular individual too, but there are a couple more that we've got in our circle. That said that, you know, we can lean on them as far as grant writing, but in this one instance, this individual will do it for 5% of whatever is won. So you don't even have to go out of pocket, you know. We don't do
Yeah,
anything.
so what I was asking though, I agree with you. The one thing I was asking, the reason I'm asking though is because sometimes you can apply for a grant for without all the details.
Mm.
And so I'm wondering how much
Oh,
detail
I
do
see.
you need?
Yeah.
So how much does council have to approve, or can we approve a general, yes, a beautification kind of thing, and then we can look at the details if and when the grant gets approved, or how does it look? Yeah, I'm just wondering how it looks.
We've found with a couple that we've written that some are more encompassing than others.
Mhm.
Some are pretty specialized, some are matching dollars, and so it's gonna be a little bit of a case by case basis.
Right.
What we're hoping for is to say, we got our blessing, go ahead, embark on this endeavor. And then as we look at, you know, couple main
Bring back.
items,
Then
yeah,
you'll bring it
we'll
back.
come back saying,
Yeah.
well, here's this at this dollar, here's this at this dollar, here's this, and you guys can say, like this, don't like this, take it off the list. And then from there, we can just go for it. And whatever comes in, well, now we can start checking things off the list. And if it doesn't, then no harm, no foul.
Yeah, because that's what I was gonna say, to wait till we all decide exactly what is not conducive to grant writing. So it would be better to let them write the grants and then have them come back and say, this is what we approved for, yes, no, yes, no.
Right.
I agree. So that's how I would do it for grant writing.
Yeah, well, that's helpful.
Is there an estimated timeline that you and your group have envisioned for that?
Well, this is the thing, when we first started out, we said, okay, you know, like Teresa was saying, you can spend millions or something like this. We said, if we wait to fundraise this whole thing, it'd be 5 years. So we said, well, let's not pigeonhole ourselves into a 6-month window or a 3-month window. Let's start with a vision and get our itemized list. And then say, if it takes 4 years, that's fine. If it takes 10 years, that's fine. But maybe it goes better than we think. And in 2 years, we've got new lighting and new signage and some green space, and so.
And it can turn into just a cyclical thing.
Exactly. As they come up, you go for them, and
Is the chamber providing seed money for any of this, or is it strictly?
we've got a little bit that we can, we've got a little bit sitting there. We haven't come into any, you know, we haven't gotten far enough to see a situation where we need it. Certainly, if it was something like a matching dollars, that would be a good start. But yeah, well, you know, ultimately what we're trying to do, because we're just a pretty, just a small group, is we're trying to keep the channels we have to run through limited, so that if something comes up, for example, there's a PV Mark grant that was due, that is due tomorrow for $100,000.
Yeah.
And it was too short a time left to make it here, but if something like this comes up, you know, if we have to wait to get on the agenda to come talk to town council and then run it out to the public and then so on and so on, while they're coming on.
That's why it would be better to let them write the grants, get it done, and then you can always change, even a grant. There, I've yet to see a grant that you couldn't go back and change the parameters of it if something happened in the meantime and you had to make a change. So I think that's the best thing to do, is to let them get started, and then when they go to make the final decision about what it is, they'll come back to council and we can have our say then. And in the meantime, if we, like Kyle said, if we have our strategic planning, we can share that with them when we're done, so that they know what we were looking at too.
Well, I'd even like them to be a part
Or
of
part there,
designing
yeah.
a section
Yeah,
of
absolutely,
consultation.
absolutely, yeah. So what do we need to do with this, Mr. Chair? Motion.
So the motion would be to let the Main Street Revitalization Group start seeking some grants. And then
Well, we could just,
Yeah.
I'll move that we, how do we want to say
Yes,
that?
that's why I was
I'll move that
stumbling
we,
over.
support in, what's the word I'm looking for? Not theory, in, principle, the work of the Main Street Committee. And that, you know, allowing them to go forward with grant writing, and we look forward to working with them in approvals and strategic planning.
Excellent.
It's a lot of motion.
So support
That's
in
something for you to
principle,
say.
supporting principle with Main Street program and allow them to go forward.
To go forward with, yeah, grant writing and, yeah.
All in favor? Motion is carried.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Ty.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Smart move.
So we have a closed session item that just sort of starts before your development permit. So, we probably maybe 15 minutes.
Can we switch 7.05 and 7.1?
Why not?
Sure, if you guys want to.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that.
Sure. So we'll go to item 7.1 and then any.
You might want to stay for the whole meeting.
Nobody wants to stay for the whole meeting.
So 7.1, development permit application 2022-3.
Development permit 2022-3 is for the addition of a pre-built 18 by 30-foot outbuilding shed and 3 existing accessory buildings to a direct control zone located at the 5007 54th Ave, Bashaw, Alberta. And I'm sorry, turning my back against you. The microphone is over there, so. The application includes additional accessory buildings, uses and diagrams of placement on the property, and the proximity to the property line has been included. The list of documents submitted are included on the attached development permit draft. Safety codes feedback, the recommendations to ensure there are smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, and egress installed in the 30-foot by 18-foot accessory outbuilding. The development authority in the direct control district shall be the council. There's no statutory plan within this direct control zone. Administration recommends council consider the following options. Option 1, approve development permit 2022-3 as presented within this report. Option 2, deny the application as they are proposing a non-compliant secondary suite with the absence of running water or kitchen facilities. Option 3, direct administration to redraft the permit with the condition that the development be built in with full secondary suite requirements, complete with separate water line connection, water meter, sewer connection, garbage removal, fully habitable facilities required, and all associated charges. The applicable legislation is listed. Administration is of the opinion this application does not require community engagement. The recommendation is, well, the administration declines provision of a recommendation, and the listing of possible motions are included in the discussion result.
Thoughts?
I have no concerns with the application. I think that it's, I think it puts, for the landowners, it puts all of the buildings that were there that didn't have it, puts everything in good state. I didn't have any real concerns unless I hear from others, but that's my thoughts.
I have no concerns, and if there are no objections to it, I would move the first motion as presented. But I guess I can wait just a minute.
Okay.
You can still move it and
I
have
got- we can-
conversations.
we can still have conversation.
Cindy?
So safety codes only feedback was regarding the smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors and egress.
Correct.
Okay. And I'm assuming you'll have all of those.
It's all right, all right.
Kyle?
I have comments. I'm concerned that this is a guest house, quite frankly. Which is the language that's used on the application we received. To be used as a she shed, man cave, guest house, storage space to accommodate large families sleeping over, create an area for hobbies, provide extra storage. So for me, it's about definitions. To me, a guest house is a secondary suite. So I want to know what is done with secondary suites. So I did what I do all the time. And I started researching other municipalities and I started looking at their land use bylaws and looked for definitions that might be congruent for us because this is not something we have. So I went to the county of Stettler, an adjacent municipality that defines a guest house as an ancillary building which has sleeping accommodation and sanitary facilities, which does not have cooking facilities and is not intended to be used as a self-contained dwelling unit. So I think the language of sanitary facilities from the county of Stettler is very helpful. I also went to Hardisty looking for a municipality of a similar size and demographic to us and found whoever wrote their land use bylaw is probably one of the most anal people I've ever met because they have definitions of garage suites and garden suites and in-law suites, and they are 10 to 13 bullet points long each. To me, there's not a huge difference between the garden suite, the in-law suite, or the garage suite, but I did find it interesting, some of the inclusions. So under Hardisty's land use bylaw from 2020 of the garden suite, section 46, subsection 7, a garden suite includes but not limited to a food preparation area, counter, cupboard space, sink, refrigerator, stove, or provision of 220-volt wiring, and toilet with bathing facilities. So I found that definition kind of interesting. Not satisfied there, I decided to go to the Summer Village of West Baptiste land use bylaw and look to see what types of things they have. And they have a suite or guest house includes, but is not limited to, sleeping areas, recreation areas, toilet, and bathing facilities. In the spirit of finding a counterpoint, and I don't have it here, it's not playing up. I did find the county of Lacombe is more generous. The county of Lacombe says guest houses for the purpose of this bylaw means an accessory building which has sleeping accommodation, but which does not have sanitary or cooking facilities and is not intended to be used as a self-contained unit. So I was able to find a very permissive land use bylaw out there. For me, though, the concern I have is that this was described to us as a building that is going to be housing people during holiday times, that this is a building that ultimately is going to have guests, namely children, and that this building is somewhere around 125 feet away from the nearest toilet facilities. And so I look at that and I just question if that's something that we want to allow. It's nothing against current landowners by any stretch of the imagination. I worry about future uses where, someone down the road might not envision this as what we might describe as a bunkhouse, but might view it as an in-law suite, that might view it as, an Airbnb type facility. I also wonder about things like ventilation, because these are items that are kind of vitally important. And even down to, I believe it said that it will have a wood burning stove or something like that. So when I look at everything, and I see this, I see where it is, I did a walkthrough and its location's right on the edge of the alley, so there's great access to it. I thought that was helpful. I also thought the pictures that we received last meeting didn't really do it justice. So having that ground eye view of it is actually really helpful in positioning it. So, you know, I think the placement of this in terms of where on the lot is fine, other than the vast distance to the main building. But ultimately, I'm of the opinion that this is a guest house. It's clearly a secondary suite. And for my money, I'm not comfortable with it unless there's the provisions, mainly being a toilet facility is the primary thing that I've seen across multiple land use bylaws and is one of the recommended motions that we have.
With all due respect, Mr. Chair, the relevance really is to our land use bylaw, and I could see as comparatives, you know, brief examples, but you've got varying size communities. So when you look at how a land use bylaw is written compared to the land use bylaw written in a county versus an urban city or a town center, the verbiage and the interaction and the purposes are quite a bit different. And so when you look at a county development and stuff, a lot of times it's not as big of an issue to have just sleeping quarters because they may be in proximity to a lake, or it may be, you know, on a farm or an acreage, and they're not quite as concerned, you know, with water connections and population density. Whereas when you're in a community, population density and water connections and additional sleeping quarters create additional challenges. However, with the location of this property and the proximity to the water body, and again, along with the history and my interactions with the property owners, there's not a lot of options for subdivision. So I believe that the controlling feature would be their application for subdivision, which, you know, the layout of the land there, it's not conducive to subdivision. And so realistically, we're looking at a wood version of a tent in some ways, just, you know, and it's just that it's larger and it's unique. And yes, you know, you could consider it precedent setting, but is it really? Because this is a direct control area that is under the jurisdiction of council.
And that's what I was just gonna ask.
I was
So,
gonna say
yeah,
question too.
So it really is, council is a driving factor on this, and we've kind of brought forward the concerns with it being a secondary suite. However, I guess I am led to believe that, you know, the property owners, with the fact they're proposing to invest in a building of this structure and nature from a brand new construction versus piecemeal or versus whatever, it tells me that they're invested in keeping it and maintaining it in an appropriate manner and for their own personal use. I guess it's, again, the location is unique, and I guess that should be considered.
When I thought about it, I come at it from the direction of, if this isn't allowed, then what would I do? And that answer is probably an old RV trailer that's gonna do the exact same thing. And it's gonna fit into the rules, but this is gonna be a lot more attractive.
I agree.
I guess my question is, if this were a residentially zoned area, would this be on the list of approved uses?
But this isn't, this is direct control.
But when factoring in direct control, we looked at neighboring uses.
Right, and when I look at it, I take into account the actual piece of property.
Right, but the neighboring uses are residential. So I'm just asking, would this fit in with the neighboring uses?
I think it does. I mean, that's what they're proposing is just general, I'm sure there's a fancier word for it, but life living. It's not commercial, it's not industrial, or just another means to enjoy their property.
so just so that I'm understanding this correctly, basically what you're asking is, if we approve this and a neighbor wants to put something like this on their property,
Which wouldn't come before council.
which wouldn't come before council, they're going to say, but our neighbors have this, why can't we And so what's our answer to that
The
question?
answer to that is this location is a direct control zone that is under the authority, and the development authority in this situation is the Bashaw Town Council. So it's, if you're looking at R1 district around in the neighborhood, and that is actually what I use to provide discretionary approval under the old bylaw to place their manufactured home. And so when you compare to many of the neighboring properties, because of the size of many of their properties, they would have to apply for discretionary approval. And if it was minor in discretion and it was a smaller size building, it could be subject to approval, like just discretionary advertisement. Or if they were proposing something near in size, because it would be beyond my scope as the development authority within an R1 zone, it would have to go to council as well.
And we can't ignore the fact too, that it is a larger property on the edge of town.
Right.
Yeah, that's a pretty large building. Not many
Yeah.
people will want to put that on their property.
Well,
Yeah,
Well,
Most
they
people
just
that would
wouldn't
cover
have
their-
the room on their property. So
to
with
accommodate
most
that.
lots, you know, the maximum coverage is 40%.
And
If
if you
they
scale it
do-
down, if somebody come to us for asking for permission for an 8x10 shed,
So that's already permissible.
So an 8x10 shed wouldn't actually require a development permit.
Right.
But whereas a 10x10 or anything larger than a 10x10 is subject to a development permit, and then all the details around that, and proximity placement, lot coverage, all of that. And then if it's something beyond that and they're proposing to sleep in it, that's where it would trigger the discretionary going, oh, okay, wait a minute.
So we're-
Or subject
So
to
do we
additional.
have other buildings in this town where people are basically doing a bed in a shed?
Not that I'm fully aware of in a legal
There's some
manner.
buildings in this town that have beds that I wouldn't be so generous as to call sheds.
Well, I think about the property behind the community or provincial building. It's got two houses on one.
It's one lot.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So there
Well, that's
has
probably a
been,
non-conforming use.
Well, and that one is
don't
a
know if it
very, very unique one, because the one home I believe is not actually having, we have two locations in town where there's two properties of housing nature. And one is contaminated or not in use as a residence.
Yeah.
And then there's a primary residence besides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we
But
have
that's not
two for
really
sure.
to do with this.
So
Correct.
is the main concern the fact that there isn't the sanitary facilities? Like, what would you say? is the-
That's one of my primary concerns. So that's item one. Item two, right, is that I don't believe it's in line with the neighboring uses, and that's a consideration of direct control. That's what good planning practice says, is we do look at those neighboring uses. And I'm actually even confused about why administration is of the opinion, I didn't get an answer last meeting, that this application does not require community engagement. Because if this were a discretionary use in a standard zone, it would require that kind of 21-day notice for someone to spend the money.
There
to
is a
appeal.
21-day notice to appeal on this development.
So
permit.
somebody can appeal this.
Absolutely,
I have a question for,
because the draft of the development permit's right in the package, and on the bottom there, it clearly states that this development permit does not come into effect until 21 days after the date of issue. And any person claiming to be affected by the decision of the development authority may appeal to the Development Appeal Board. However, actually, that should actually be removed from
because
here
it direct
because
control, there is no appeal.
there is no appeal.
So can somebody appeal in 21 days?
On this application, no.
Follow-up question, item 6 on the draft permit, I guess I'll call it. It says this development permit does not authorize a secondary suite. Can you explain to me the difference between a secondary suite and this guest house?
So a secondary suite by definition has water and kitchen facilities. And so we went through those definitions in our previous discussion piece. And so This application also, we state that no water or sewer connections will be approved for the one new accessory building or the 3 existing accessory. And this development permit does not authorize a secondary suite, as we've reiterated.
So basically, they're not allowed to put
Water.
water and sewer in
Correct.
here.
It would not be approved.
And so if they came back at a later date saying, hey, you know what, this is working out really well for us. We do want to put a bathroom or something like that in.
Then it would come to council.
Okay,
I guess I'm confused when you tell me what the definition of secondary suite is, because I've opened up our land use file to the definitions. And there is no definition.
It's under
for
housing.
Housing,
Yes.
housing. Where do I need to go here?
However, the governance is your decision here, not necessarily the interpretation of the land use bylaw. So it's kind of one of those weird tricky areas.
Where we're both, but we're also the development authority. Second entrance. Let's see if we can do it.
so, and again, I'm coming back to this whole bathroom thing. So let's say they decided to put an outhouse. Does that address?
If I may, Mr. Chair. An outhouse would not be approved in that area because of the proximity to the water.
Sure, okay, I just,
I think the biggest concern with the
Porta
construction of this is just simply the fire safety, which, you know, with the smoke detectors and the carbon monoxide alarms. And then as well, you know, communication with the fire department. They could also, you know, have an outlined plan of for egress and fire escape as well. So if in the event of a fire, and the individual safety staying in the building really is the biggest concern.
well, and I did ask the question last time about the windows being big enough that if somebody needed to evacuate through there, that they could. So I think that was already
And
partially.
the access for a fire truck is very good, actually.
I feel somewhat inadequate around development planning because we are so new. And so unlike Kyle, I don't do as much research with other communities. So I guess I just have to look at what we have. And I like to, I think in my purposes, I know administration has not given a recommendation, but as when it comes to auxiliary, or no, what do we call it? Kind of a suite.
Accessory buildings.
Yeah. Can it not just be considered an accessory building, not a suite of any sort?
Well, it needs a definition of an accessory building.
Yeah.
I guess it's just the fact that there's proposed
Possibly
sleeping
sleeping in it.
occupation in it. That's the biggest difference.
Well,
But it sounds like it's going to be in an intermittent basis. You know, like,
Personally, have slept in my garden shed.
I was gonna say, I've seen people sleep in their garages too,
I've done that.
so.
yeah,
You're right
yeah,
here,
and
too.
realistically, you have
It's not
people
here.
parking their RVs in their
Yeah.
yards,
That's something.
you know what I mean, and plugging them in and whatnot. You know,
I've used my trailer as a guest house.
so I guess
Counts in the
ultimately it's up to
backyard.
council. I guess the only thing
It's there here.
would be that we may have to redraft, I may have to redraft this development permit because there is no appeal on it. If council chose to approve the permit.
I will make a motion. And we can vote and
Which, just to be clear, which motion are you making?
the first one moved by Brian, that council issue the attached development permit, which is for the purpose of 3 by 18 foot accessory building and 3 existing accessory buildings.
With recommended amendments.
with the amendment to the regarding the appeal.
Discussion on the motion?
I believe if there's no appeal, we owe it to neighboring residents as we would any discretionary use, and this is clearly sounding to me like it would be a discretionary use if it weren't direct control, to create an avenue to canvass the few neighboring residences along that alley to make sure they have no concerns.
I think that's a good idea.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I guess in that event, why not just continue to include the ability to appeal the permit?
Yeah, we can make that decision, can we?
Yeah.
Well, then why don't we? do
So
that?
then it could be treated just like any discretionary authority where the
Would they-
ability to appeal is listed on here.
Will
So,
they appeal to council rather than the appeal board?
yes. Actually, you know what, I might have to get more information on that, I don't know.
And so just remind me how this works. So like I know in a previous town that I lived in, if somebody was to put something in, we get a letter in the mail that says one of your neighbors is proposing to do this, that, or the other thing. Is that the way it works here? Or like I know that you've got the board out there and a bunch of the permits are posted up there. So is that the way?
The permits are always posted up there,
Okay,
all permits are posted up there.
okay,
If there is a discretionary issue, a notice of decision is generated. And so on that notice of a decision, we basically outline where it varies from the land use bylaw. And so then we circulate that notice of decision, we send it to adjacent property owners as per the section within our land use bylaw.
okay. So the neighbors will get
Yeah.
something in the mail.
So I guess in many ways, like the ability, I guess, like having the commentary about the ability to appeal probably does not serve our situation on here. However, making the motion that, you know, adjacent neighbors be given a letter and, you know, I guess you'd have to pass a motion to enable that to actually happen. And then if there would be the corresponding fee, but then who is going to be hearing the appeal? And it actually complicates things because legislatively, you know, your direct control areas are not appealable. So you're basically going back
So we're
on
asking the
your own
neighboring-
legislation.
The neighboring neighbors to provide comment. Provide
Before
comment or
approval?
feedback.
But the process is
Is
very
legislated.
legislative. It is very concrete.
But could we not
It's community engagement. is that what it is?
Could we not do community engagement, issue a letter tomorrow? And whatever the next meeting is, because if, honestly, for me, despite my objections, despite my land use issues, again, I went and looked at the property, I went through the back alley. I think the access is good, I think the distance to the water is good, like it's actually a beautiful lot that I never really paid attention to before. If there were no community objections to this, I would easily vote in favor of it.
I talked to all the neighbors and they don't have a problem, if that helps. There's not, they're all happy for it.
Well, I guess in the next, you know, send a letter to them. We can get it out to them tomorrow and
Well, I don't think it's necessary. Because again, we could talk to the neighbors. I mean, that is the best way to communicate is between people. I just think that it needs to, you know, we do have direct control. I think it just is it, and I don't think we need to rewrite policy to do this.
so really we just need to change that. Section 2 at the bottom, or remove that section 2.
So basically being that it's a direct control zone,
There's no appeal.
no appeal.
Yeah, those.
Do you still have the 21-day if you don't have an appeal process?
No,
You just leave that alone, right? You take out 1 and 2, sort of thing, so.
Yeah.
And 3? Oh, would you leave 3 in?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm still actually in favor of this, but what to Councillor McIntosh's point, does administration feel like we have good, if somebody were to come and complain and say, I would like to do this too, and it's not in our direct control, have we done all the right things? Because I'm not a development planner, to make sure that, we're not just throwing out a decision just because we feel like it.
If there were subsequent applicants that in any of the residential zones that put in another application similar in this nature, it would be quantified as discretionary and would go
Okay.
to council.
Okay.
So my discretionary authority is based on a percentage of like placement within the property to property lines, like, so a shed placement maybe an inch closer to the property line, which I could say, I could provide discretionary approval on
Got
that.
it.
And so it's based on a percentage, whereas this is content in nature, so it would have to go to council for discretionary approval as well.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Or the other portion would be that it would be advertised amongst the neighbors. So we've, again, for example, the shed development on a vacant lot.
Mhm.
That one was completely discretionary. Based on the area and stuff, it was discretionary approved. Any adjacent neighbors were provided with a notification saying, hey, this is non-compliant with the bylaw. You have the opportunity to appeal.
Okay, so I was just gonna ask that. So in planning, is that always the case where some, discretionary can happen no matter what? If you choose to allow it?
It's all depends on what it is.
Okay.
So like in the case of the vacant shed on the property,
Mhm.
it really, because of the nature of the location and everything, there was not going to be any contention or conflict about it. Where a lot of times when you're going through the applications, if I felt that there was a situation where it could create some conflict or some questionability, and I wasn't certain on my decision within the discretionary authority, then I would be bringing it to council.
Thank you.
So we have a motion to approve the development permit with the mentioned amendments, removing the 21-day effectiveness clause and the appeal clause. Correct? Sure. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Moving on to 7.05, our point closed session. Oh, now we have it.
No.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah.
We have to permit within the next meeting.
Oh, yeah.